needs to go to university. I love books, I loved history, I love politics. I had a great time at university studying those, and that worked for me. It doesn't work for everybody. Lots of people do different things, and we should certainly evaluate and praise those in a very different way than I think we do already. I think we're far too snobby about people who go to university or people who don't go to university. It's not the be-all and the end-all. And also, as one of our texters was saying a second ago, it does saddle you with a huge amount of debt. And we look at the workforce and how the workforce is doing at the moment, and the many, many problems that the workforce is going through. There are all sorts of serious problems, and one thing we know is that there are an awful lot of people who are not in the workforce, something like 9 million working age adults who are not in the workforce, and now there is a plan for long-term sick people to look for jobs in an overhaul of benefits. This story is the front page of the Times today. PM will curb 65 billion benefit bill with back to work push. Tom Pollard is head of social policy at the New Economics Foundation. Tom, is this going to work? Is this going to get people back to work? Is this going to bring growth? Is this going to help the economy? What do you think of this plan?
Yeah, morning, Peter.
Morning.
I think, undoubtedly the government has a huge challenge in that there are a large number of people out of work because of disability or poor health, and that number is projected to grow a lot over the kind of coming period. And they announced some plans back in the autumn around kind of improving employment support, and I think there was a lot to welcome in there, trying to shift away from a situation where people are fearful to engage with the job centre. I think the risk is the kind of plans being kind of mooted today will give a sense to ill and disabled people that they're kind of under risk again of losing benefits. And what we've seen over the last kind of 15, 20 years is lots of attempts to kind of tighten eligibility criteria, place greater demands on people who are on these benefits, and on the whole it hasn't really worked.
Well, we've also seen a huge increase in people getting benefits, and I'm not for a second am I arguing that people who are genuinely disabled, who cannot work, shouldn't get disability benefits. That is the mark of us as a society, and that we have a welfare state. We help people who can't help themselves. That's fine, I have no issue with that. But we're seeing statistics, we're seeing that something like 7% of the benefits bill is fraudulent. There are many billions of pounds every year going to people who shouldn't get benefits. Surely some form of reassessment is actually not a bad idea, Tom.
Yeah, so I think there are undoubtedly problems with the assessment system, but often those problems are that people have a very poor experience of that process and come out of it feeling, people develop a bit of a siege mentality, if I'm honest. They engage with a system that feels quite predatory, that feels like it's very trying to catch them out. Fraud within the kind of disability benefit system isn't anywhere near a kind of 7% figure. I mean, for something like personal independence payment, it's down near 1%. I think we need to separate out those questions. So fraud is a separate issue, and of course we should deal with fraud. I don't think what we're talking about here is fraud. It's people who feel too unwell to work. And the question then is, how do you support those people closer to work? Right.
And I mean, we have seen work change dramatically in the last few years, Tom, haven't we? We've seen working from home. We've seen people who can work a little bit, maybe not all the time. I've said this before on air, one of my best friends has multiple sclerosis. Some days she wakes up, she can do a full day's work. Some days she wakes up, she can do maybe 2 hours or 3 hours. Other days she can't work at all because she feels dreadful. And I do think that there is a way for the system, and especially now because of hybrid working from home and flexible working, that can fit in with how people are feeling and what work people can do.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. And I think what the system should be doing is making people feel kind of secure and confident in taking that step. Right? And like over the last sort of 10, 15 years, very little has been done to kind of proactively reach out to people who are in this position and offer them support. So we're presented with this false dichotomy that says, well, at the moment the system writes people off, and the only way we can redress that is to kind of place stricter requirements on people. And my argument would be, well, first of all, I'd try genuinely reaching out to people and offering that support, because that hasn't really happened. And actually, when we've gone down a path of saying, well, you have to do this, and if you don't do it, you lose your benefit, what tends to happen is people get very anxious and they engage in a very cautious and compliant way. And that's not the path that leads people back into work. What we've seen time and time again is that the services that do this well do it on a voluntary basis, do it by understanding people and building a genuine, trusting relationship. And the reality is you can't do that by saying to people, if you don't turn up for this appointment, you're going to lose your benefits. I think it's just a massive misstep.
Tom, we'll return to this conversation in a second. Apologies for interrupting you. There's just a bit of breaking news, and that is that the Rafah border crossing has opened for patients. Sick and wounded Palestinian children have begun crossing Gaza's Rafah border to Egypt. Its first opening in nearly 9 months. That is a big development. We've seen Palestinian prisoners, we've seen Israeli hostages, including Keith Siegel, freed today. We will return to that story, but let's go back to Tom now. Apologies for that interruption there. Figures published this week showed that 2.4 million incapacity benefit claimants had no work conditions attached, up 50% in 5 years, Tom. These statistics are quite startling.
Yeah, so, we've seen some evidence published by the Department for Work and Pensions this week that said that some of that rise was kind of to be expected with demographic changes. We know that some of it comes on the back of the pandemic. So it's not kind of entirely unexplainable, but I agree that rise is concerning. The question is, do you reverse that rise by then placing stricter conditions on those people? And there isn't strong evidence to suggest that when it comes to people with health conditions that is an effective approach. So I guess what I'm arguing for is that the government has set out a plan around improving employment support. They need to really try to make that work, and the risk is that what's being kind of floated at the moment directly undermines that plan, because it creates this sense of caution and risk among people, which will make it harder for people to engage with that support. I mean, this is going to be a long-term project. You can't shortcut this. People have, become very cautious about returning to work because of the health conditions they experience, but also because of a benefit system that has kind of created a hostile environment for lots of people.
Why are we sicker?
That's going to take time to turn around.
Okay. Why are we sicker as a nation, Tom? What's happened? Is it the pandemic? Why is it that these numbers of people who are on all sorts of benefits have gone up to such a degree, do you think?
Yeah, so I think, there is evidence that there have been increases, particularly around things like mental health problems and, greater recognition and diagnosis of things like neurodiversity. So there's some of that going on. Some of it will undoubtedly be the aftermath of the pandemic. I think we still see people who are struggling to recover from that kind of shock to their lives and potentially to their employment. But some of it is that the benefit system has created this very difficult environment for people, where people are either on a regular unemployment benefit, which is incredibly low.
Some people would argue it's not a difficult environment because there are far more people on benefits. It's actually an easier environment because more and more people are on benefits. I know there are a number of factors there. I don't mean to be cruel to people who are on benefits, Tom, but there are a lot more people on benefits than there were 5 years ago.
Well, there are more people on disability-related benefits, and we've seen a shift from more people being on other categories of benefits where they do have more conditions applied to them. And my argument would be that because that environment is difficult for people in terms of both the low rate of payment that people get on regular universal credit, but also the kind of strict requirements that come along with that. In part, that is what has driven lots of people to kind of seek protection from that. So we need to find a way to kind of make people feel confident about taking that step back into, trying to move towards work. And that is going to rely on kind of building trusting, supporting relationships with people. And the risk is that if you try and rush that, if you just say to someone, well, you have to do this, I think what you'll see is that people somewhat retrench and possibly become more unwell as a result. I just think you have to be very cautious about how you approach this. I think there are ways to make progress. There are services out there that do help people with even quite severe health conditions back into work, but it is about building trust and rapport with people, and I don't think that can be shortcutted.
And not shortcutting that, that is clearly a very, very big and complex thing for the Department of Work and Pensions can tackle. Do you think the department that you used to be part of, do you think it's fit for purpose in regard to that? Do you think it can actually deal with this in a grown-up way and get that benefits bill down and help people at the same time?
I think there was lots to welcome in the white paper that DWP put out in the autumn, and I think particularly within that a recognition that maybe the best place to do this work is at kind of a local level, joining up services at a local level that people maybe already trust, already engage with, and there is a big kind of program of devolution going on now in that space. I think that's right. I think the risk is that they get put under pressure by Treasury to achieve these savings much quicker, and that Treasury isn't satisfied with this kind of longer term plan to support people. And I think those two things will end up being in direct opposition. I think if you try and rush this by tightening eligibility, increasing expectations and requirements on people, that will cut directly against a program of reform which has talked about trying to build trust, trying to build genuine engagement. Unfortunately, those two things are, I think, in direct opposition.